Boy, the AI just heard me. So we're working on, placing detection cameras that help alleviate, that call load from the dispatchers, but also provides dispatchers and fire managers kind of that quick eyes in the sky. I get an alert on my phone, whether it's my day off or not. I can pull up on my phone and based on what the conditions on that day, make a decision really quickly. And then I kind of talked about our response plans, something that we're also kind of working on. To add what Sterling talked about was we're really making progress on indice-based dispatching. And so basically, when it's snowing, we don't need to send the world. But when there's a red flag warning, we need to send more than just one engine to go check things out. I know I perked your eyebrows up there, but it's being worked on. It's a long and complicated process. I'm not a computer guy, so I let dispatch handle a lot of that, but there's a large push for that. So again, just a tip of the iceberg of a lot of the stuff that's been going on at the county level, but a lot of stuff that I feel really positive about.
I missed two that I think might be important. Another lesson learned that I learned that I thought most people knew was how to open your garage door when you don't have any power. Right? A lot of people don't know that or are unable to do it. If you haven't practiced it at home, go practice it because the door is heavier than you think it is. And then when the wind's blowing on it, it's even heavier, and then you're scared, it's even heavier. Those things. I was fortunate enough to pick up a couple people that were on foot that day because they couldn't get their car out because they couldn't get the garage door open. They didn't know. Fire safes is another thing. You buy a fire safe and you're like, I'm golden, put all my gems and my treasures in there. They don't last for very long. If you're buying a fire safe, look at the ratings, see what it's rated for, understand what that means. Because really, a lot of them don't mean a lot. They're very short time. So for fire safes, just because it says fire safe on it, take a look at the ratings of it. How hot can it get? How long can it be that hot before you open it back up and you don't have anything on there? So those were two kind of big things for people to take home that you can apply right away is practice open your garage door and then check your fire safe that you think you have. If you can't take it with you, check how long you think it's going to last and how hot it can get. Those were two big things that I learned too.
I'm going to talk about some extra stuff, but I wanted to write some notes. Now I'm just going to have to do it off the cuff.
Sorry. I can keep going. I can talk for days.
Well, that's it. These topics we could spend a whole day on by themselves. Going back, Chief Wilson talked about the fuels and the fuel conditions, not having the snow to knock it down. I'll also go and extend and talk about mowing fuels. I live in the city of Golden, and I vehemently oppose what they talk about with the neighbors in wildland areas where the open space folks tell them not to mow the grasses outside of their fence lines. I'm so against that because I've seen so many times where, these fast advancing surface fires run into these shorter fuels and they run out of gas, and it makes it a lot easier for us to get in there and do suppression work on those fuels. So I'm wearing a uniform with my division stuff on, but I just said City of Golden's doing it wrong. But I live there, so I'm a resident. So I would say mowing is great, right? There's examples, look into the FLA that talk about where, the fire ran into areas with shorter fuels that were, less receptive and harder to burn. And also the extreme wind. We're talking about modeling. Nobody models at 100 miles an hour because all the models stop when the winds are over 40 miles an hour. So they all break when you try to feed them 100-mile-an-hour wind. So we have to figure out how to model with that limitation. With that, those shorter fuels or those grass fuels, sometimes when you get those super high windy days, there's enough wind that it'll extinguish the fire. It'll blow the fire right off of those fuels. In this case, when the when the wind would take a little break, those fuels would come right back alive, and there'd be enough heat there that those grass fuels could reignite and they could continue, right? So you get this pulsing fire behavior through the surface fires. So that's a big deal to consider. But if we mow those grasses in some of those areas, we found, and we've seen it hundreds of times where it is really effective. So when we're doing prescribed fires, oftentimes we have mow lines. and we can burn off of them really effectively and do really great things. So that's a thing to think about on fuels. From the Division of Fire Prevention and Control, we've had a long-term plan to do a lot of work with our Intel shop. And we just really kind of start tooling it up. And so now we're doing a lot more work on modeling emerging fires and trying to figure out when is the next big one going to come up. So, we've had a lot of practice this spring so far over the last 5 weeks in areas in southeast Colorado. But we're learning every day, and our modelers are learning every day on how to look at these fires and try to help suss out which one of these is going to be the biggest problem that's going to relate to problems for local agencies, that is going to become a state problem. So we're trying to work through those problems. You guys haven't seen these cool products yet because they're not quite ready for prime time. So, but someday, we hope to be able to get them in the hands of local folks when we really figure out the sausage and make it right for them to have that stuff. But as it is right now, if our leadership sees it, they start pressing it out to our folks that are responding to help assist with their fires. So those are some really big things. We also have the multi-mission aircraft program at the Division of Fire. And this is the first time we've said aircraft at all about the Marshall Fire. And during that day, there was 0 aircraft flying anywhere because of the windy conditions. In fact, really, we were modeling with some other tools. We were modeling some of what the Marshall Fire was doing and feeding that back into the IC that day. And it's clearly not aircraft based, but some satellite imagery that we were looking to model some of what the Marshall Fire was doing and trying to help get the IC some intel as to where this thing was, where we could see the heat signatures for it. That's all I can say without having to kill everybody in the room. So anyway, so because it is classified data that we're, just to be clear. So, but we're working on other tools. As soon as the winds let up and we were able to fly our multi-mission aircraft, we were able to actually map a perimeter and get some infrared imagery out to resources so that they could see where really the fire was and where the hotspots were within the perimeter and other issues that were going to be necessary inside of there. So we talked about the resource ordering and the mobilization of resources. In Cameron Peak, we learned to do this little project. We called it surge. So it's basically surge capacity to bring extra resources in to fight fires. We refined that, and even in the Marshall Fire, we spooled that up, and I was actually one of the people sitting at the phone until midnight getting resources orders to come to the Marshall Fire to help out. But we refined that process even then, so it was better. But since then, we've even gone 3 steps further, and with this EC or the Resource Mutual Aid System now, and it's called the Wildfire Immediate Needs System now. We're able to mobilize or notify fire departments, get them status and indicate that they're available, and get them resource orders and get them rolling to these fires a lot faster in an organized fashion. So they have good communication. That is a problem that we've seen before. So they can get tied into the incident rapidly and be a part of the solution as we bring them in there. So I think I'm getting the hook. We could talk all night.
Thank you, Rocco. So we're gonna shift into questions, but first, there's a lot of resources around what homeowners can do based on what we've learned on fire behavior from the FLA. We did a session on that previously, so there's a recording on the website. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend going there. We also have resources on the Louisville, Superior, and Boulder County website as well. Okay, and let's go to questions. Right here. We're going to ask the folks speak their questions in the microphone so the Zoom participants can also hear.
Thank you. Thanks for all the information. I have a couple of random questions based on what you said. The first one is, I think this is for you, Seth, right? Is that your name?
Yep.
For those wildfire detection cameras, are either of the two of them out here in the East County, or are they all in the West? That's my first question.
All right, so right now we've got 3 of them. There is one on, they're all kind of attached to infrastructure, existing infrastructure, radio communication towers. So there's one on Mount Thornton, which provides a great view over here. There's also on Lee Hill, which is just northwest of Boulder. It's in the foothills. So those are kind of the 2 cameras that have a really good view of kind of the eastern part of the county. And then our last one is up at Eldora. We've got a radio site just above the ski slopes there. Our second pilot program, we're looking at adding 8 cameras, including 2 FLA cameras, so the infrared. And those will primarily be along the flats and the foothill communities. So we're hoping to get a lot out of that.
We do have an online question.
Okay, let's do part 2
Oh, sorry.
this question, and then we'll come to an online question.
All right, I just have one more question and then a comment. No, I can't find it. Okay, well, I'll just make my comment. For the mowing that you were talking about, I think that's great. But like, we have been told by Louisville Open Space that they may or may not know behind our houses. I live off the open space right across the street. And we are allowed to mow a 10-foot fire break, but if you think back to the days of the Marshall Fire, the leaves were this tall. There's no way my residential mower is gonna mow a 10-foot swath with my electric or whatever mower. So do you have a suggestion for homeowners, not your land, the other part?
No, I'm gonna jump in and answer
Okay,
your question for him to a degree. So the first item is I want to get a shout out to the watershed committees that's made up of a number of communities and also the county. And they formed a grassland subcommittee, and we're looking at all kinds of mitigation on how to control and work with the grasslands. So Rocco said mowing was one of the big things in Golden. What the city of Louisville is looking at is they've already hired, and they're gonna get some goats and they're gonna get some cattle, because they work just as well. But we're looking at a number of items. We're looking at prescribed burns. We're looking at mowing. There's nothing that's off the table basically. So I just wanted to jump in on that, and then Rocco could answer you.
I just make a comment that, you can mow year round, so you can mow when that grass is a lot shorter. And maybe it takes a couple of cuttings through the season, through the year to get there. Because if you do wait till it's this, I'm not even gonna go out and mow my lawn if it's that tall.
well, now that I know I can mow it, I can do it, but I didn't know that then.
Exactly. I know.
People were threatened by the city if they cut that lawn. There were a number of people who complained that the city was gonna fine them for cutting protected grasslands. So as far as I'm concerned, that's something that needs to be addressed with the cities.
Yeah, I have no dog in that fight.
We can jump in. I live against open space too, but in Lafayette, if you have a homeowners association, maybe they can assist with that. If you don't, and it's too tall, weed trim it like a weed whacker first, and then come through with a mower. So a couple suggestions there.
All right, we'll go to online. Susan Liu, you'll have to unmute on your end. No, I got you.
Okay, are you there?
Hear you.
Hello?
Area.
Okay. I'd like to address this mowing and mitigation on open space. So we've heard a lot about homeowners' responsibility and a little bit on what the fire districts are doing with regard to mowing and mitigation on publicly owned lands. So I know that there's no open space representative here. So I hope your effort is not siloed to just the fire districts or fire types. As you are all aware, we live in Boulder County. The open space advocates have a huge political impact, and we've already encountered political opposition to doing anything on open space because it's not natural. I want to know what you're going to do to enforce the political will to do mitigation. And then I also want to comment that it may be really cutesy to do goats and cattle, but we've done that before. And if anybody's honest about it, it's incredibly expensive. Mowing is cheaper. So, and then my final question is on modeling. Did you model around the manicured landscape at the Louisville Police Department and the grazed prairie further south on McCaslin on the western side where open space exists? Because if you came and you took pictures of that after the fire, it didn't look anything like what the rest of us looked like. Thank you.
So I can speak a little bit to open space, and then I think, well, sorry, Commissioner, okay. I can speak a little bit about what the city is doing in regards to open space. As you may know, we're in the process of completing a wildfire risk assessment. This will look at city-owned public lands and assess risks related to wildfire for those lands, and then potential strategies for mitigation. We're actually going to have an open house on May 24th at the City Hall. It's part of this series, so if you've been following it, you should get notification for that meeting as well. And at that meeting, we're going to have staff and the consultants go over those recommendations and get any additional input. So I highly urge everyone to come and join that. And then also we did, I know that the city did additional mowing last year. We're planning on doing the same this year. We're looking at grazing as well. And we're in the process of applying for some grant funds to expand our mitigation efforts on city land around mowing and grazing. So it's a priority for the city as well, and work that will continue. That I will turn over to Commissioner Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Ashley Sullivan, County Commissioner. Thank you all for the questions, and thank you for being here tonight. It's great to hear from Councilmember Lou as well. And just to correct one thing, the city has always allowed mowing of a 10-foot buffer. A lot of people didn't know it. Planting on the open space has never been allowed, and there were notes that were sent out about building structures like gazebos or sidewalks or planting on the open space. But the mowing of 10 feet behind your fence has been a practice that's been allowed I just want to talk a little bit about the wildfire mitigation tax that folks passed last year. 1A, it's a combination tax that will help with mitigation on public property and a program to help people with information, education, and potential resources for private property mitigation. And how that'll be deployed is still being developed in a very collaborative way, with input from fire districts and input from the various jurisdictions in the area. The trick about mowing is you have to mow at the right time and in the right conditions. Like, you can't just say we're going to mow. It's actually much more complex than that, because if we mowed in October, it dries out the soils even further, and you just have that debris sitting there. So the fuel still exists that was grown earlier in the year. So a lot of things are much more complicated than they seem. One of the main fields that our Marshall Fire cut across had been grazed 3 times that year. So it's not as simple as grazing either. So we really need our open space management to be much more sophisticated than it has been in the past. So we have been trying to implement short-term solutions so people can see there's a difference. I applaud the town of Superior and city of Louisville for the mowing they did last year to show people they're making a concerted effort. But we really need to be much more sophisticated. And in our area, we have so many scientists and resources that can help us with modeling and understand what that really looks like, so that we can have healthy soils that retain the moisture, and we can mitigate the fuels and really have healthy ecosystems. So while I understand the desire to seek solutions and have the answer today, Sometimes the answers are just much more complicated. So in the short term, I think you'll continue to see the land managers trying different things while we come up with these more holistic approaches. And we'll try to do a better job of communicating what different applications are happening in which areas. Even something as easy as drainage ditches, the irrigation ditches and canals, each one has complicated different ownership. And there are lots of different treatments. So I know City of Louisville is working on undergrounding theirs on the Marshall Mesa, which will go a long way toward preventing fuels in the future. And other areas, they're not. Some areas are great candidates for burning and others are not. We are trying to get information out to people who have ditch easements on their properties so that they know what mitigation they're allowed to do within their property. Because a lot of people just didn't know they could mow behind their fence. A lot of people didn't know they could mitigate fuels in the ditch easement on their property. And so education is a big piece in the short term, and getting community input is a big piece. So I really appreciate this effort and just want to thank the chiefs for their work.
And question.
Oh, mine's more than that.
Okay.
Mine actually is more of a statement and then falls into a question or an answer, depending on how you take it. Now, we all can agree that this is Colorado, semi-arid climate. November, this place dries out. Regardless of climate change, environmental, you're going to have a dry climate. Now, I've lived in Louisville for 30 years. So I've spoken with a lot of old timers that are from here. One thing that they mentioned to me is everything west of Louisville is farmland, or was farmland at one time. If you look at old photos of Louisville towards the mountain, you don't see this tall grass. What you're looking at is not grass. These people are telling me what you're looking at is hay. It's not a native species here to Colorado. The fact that people confuse hay with grass is kind of disturbing, because if you look at the environment, or if you look at the grasses that grow here in Colorado, you have Colorado native shortgrass, Colorado native grass. It does not grow 6 feet high. The fact that we're sitting here, we're allowing these people to come in and convince our city council that what's out there is native grass. It is not. We need to get some horticulturists in here to try to educate our city council and Boulder County as to what is actually out there. And we need to find out a way to get rid of this, get rid of this hay, or find a way to control it. Now, in the past decades, they always would cut this down. People who were here part of the fire department realized or knew that. I live across from Davidson Mesa. Come November, that was always cut down. We would get the dry lightning storms come through. Those storms would spark a small fire. You get 50, 60 miles an hour winds. Those fires could just pretty much burn themselves out or easily controlled by the fire department. Okay. Another thing that doesn't hold water with me, okay, NCAR had a real nasty fire last year. It was also one of the snowiest months out there. So the fact that you use the excuse that snow pushes the grass down and reduces the fire does not fly by me for me, because if we had the winds at NCAR like we had here, we'd have a heck of a lot more people from Boulder sitting in this meeting. The end.
Any information or?
Thank you for your comments. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm angry because I lost our house, and many times we would ride our bikes and I would comment, if someone drops a match out here, we're screwed. And apparently someone did. So that's why I'm very angry about, very passionate about what I found, what I've researched and found.
Thanks. Okay. Thanks.
Any questions online? Any other questions?
Hi, I suppose this question is for Seth, who had mentioned prescribed burns on open space or with the ditches. What do you think could actually be accomplished, considering how complex ditches in open space are? I ask because I actually live across the street from one of those pictures that went by, and we lost our house. And I see that if I fully mitigate my property, it doesn't help very much when there are many, many dead trees and high grass. And frankly, just unkempt open space that's not taken care of since the fire, not the fences, not anything. I believe that that's all City of Boulder open space. And it's the Davidson ditch, but I would just love if anything could happen. So if there's hope, I'd like to hear what might be possible.
Yeah, I'll also just add, the grant funding that we were seeking to do some additional mitigation, that also include, some ditch clearing. So we're kind of starting on a multi-year process to address the ditches that are on city property.
So I'll try to address some of that. The ditch burning is ongoing. Right now, I've worked with Parks and Open Space to tackle a dozen, maybe a few more ditches each year. There are hundreds of miles in the county. And again, I think that's one area that we can tackle fairly easily. But it is complicated, as Commissioner Stolzman kind of mentioned, between working with those ditch riders, working with the water companies, finding the right conditions, us as fire managers for prescribed fire. Again, we write burn plans to make sure that we are kind of making sure we're burning in the right conditions. We don't want to burn right in front of a red flag warning or 60-mile-per-hour winds. So it really is threading the needle on getting things accomplished. And every day I'm trying to tackle something that at least makes that needle just a little bit wider to loosen those reins. So I don't have anything tangible on that, but that is my one of my goals is to keep moving forward with that. And again, prescribed fire in the grasslands is it's almost annual maintenance. So it takes a lot of man hours, it takes a lot of personnel hours to continually chasing after a certain ditch, a certain property, get into a start point, an end point, and then finding the conditions on which we can make that happen. So does that answer some of your question a little bit? Yeah, so working with Parks and Open Space. I mean, I want to be respectful. Yeah, they certainly have a mission, and what I bring to the table is a different viewpoint. So we got to find that middle ground on the appropriate land management. And I think that goes back into the previous comments is, yeah, it's a tricky and complicated question. And sir, I'll say I agree with you on the native stuff. So I come from Southern California. My mom's a florist, and her big plea was the same thing: bring back native grasses, bring back native plants. So I don't know anything about it, but I empathize.
They don't, native grass will burn, but the problem with hay is hay breaks up and it's easily carried by winds.
Yeah.
I have a question on the modeling that NOAA does. Once NOAA completes their models, is there any training or planning done based on the models?
Yes. So the quick answer is yes. But there are a lot of factors that go in modeling. So you have the wind, you have the fuel, how light or how dry is the fuel, how tall is the fuel. So there are a lot of complications, but yes, we always train on some of the modeling that's occurring.
So I want to clear that up also, right? So NOAA does weather modeling and fire behavior analysts do fire behavior and analysis and modeling. I think that I sensed a little that you were thinking that NOAA is doing fire behavior modeling, and they're not responsible for doing that. That happens with fire department personnel that are trained in that. Hopefully that helps.
We have an online. Larry Donner.
Thank you. I just have a concern, and I'd like to ask the question, what we can do to avoid the paralysis of analysis. Often when I hear government officials say this is really, really complex, it's an excuse for inaction. And I would like to know what we're going to do to avoid the paralysis of analysis. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Any question?
Yeah, I have a question for Rocco. Is there any kind of a model that could be done? I know it's pretty hard to do, but how far away from homes would you have to mow out to the open space? Perhaps save those homes. And if it names or anything like that, I mean, obviously we can't mow the whole open space to forward, but 300 yards or 400 yards, I have no idea.
I'll take a stab at it. That's a complicated question, given the conditions that we had during the Marshall Fire. To break it down and make it a little simpler, in our normal fire conditions, if you had a 10-foot mow line and the grasses were 4 inches tall, that would be pretty manageable in almost any circumstance that I could dream up to have fire propagate through that fuel, right? So, but the Marshall is a whole different animal because, as we talked about with the hay being brittle and breaking off, and, embers that are, being pushed, up to a mile or 2 miles in advance of the fire, then that whole mowing thing kind of loses a little bit of it, but it would help us with a surface fire. But when we get multiple structures involved, those are big ember generators that are, once they get involved, parts come off of the roof and parts come out and they start spreading on to other plants. So a little complicated, but to try to keep it simple and in a normal condition of fire on the landscape, short 4-inch grass and 10 feet is usually as good as you can get.
Hi, thank you. Actually, just first for the amount of work that goes into this kind of research and the fact that so many of you at all levels are involved in improving and I think genuinely trying to make all of Boulder County a much safer place moving forward. For those of us who were directly impacted by the Marshall Fire, whether that was through having to evacuate, the fear that came from that, or whether it was losing our homes, just you taking this action moves us a long way in feeling a little bit more confident, I think, in living here. I do agree, Larry, though, I'd love to know a timeline for some of what you're doing. I think that's a very fair question. It's over a year, and although I'm grateful that we're now getting to the research, I'd like to know how much longer before there is action. But my actual question was Seth brought up resource sharing. Firefighters from Louisville had gone to Superior, from my understanding, to help with fire. And I think this is probably more direct to you, Chief Wilson, if you don't mind. When we share our resources to help the broader community, what kind of things do you have in place to make sure that we can still stay safe?
Perfect question. And that was one of the lessons learned that we had. We have what we call auto aid. And what that means is that when we get a call, when dispatch gets the call, then they dispatch the closest appropriate unit. So we're not going to send an ambulance to a fire most of the time. We might a little bit just to make sure that there's no one that's hurt, or if a firefighter gets hurt, then we have something on scene. But most of the time, we have other resources behind us. So if I send my resources over to Superior, then Lafayette will bump a little bit closer to Louisville. And so then North Metro will bump it and closest to Superior. And we have resources all around us. We have 75 departments come to our aid over about 7 days, basically. But we do have items that we're working on along with the mobilization from the state and through the county and so on. But yes, that's something in the back of my mind that when I run out of resources, I'm going to have another call in Louisville. Who's going to answer it? And so that's what we've worked on, and we're improving as we go.
Yeah, just add something to that. You bet. Hey, and I also want to emphasize from the out of county perspective, it's up to the fire districts, but we never want to empty our barn to go help somebody else. So, it's kind of weighing the scales there of, okay, we want to hit something really hard, but we also want to cover our back door. And so on, December 30th, the Marshall Fire was actually the third wildland fire in the county. We had a fire about at 9:30, just north of Boulder, the Broadway fire, and we were able to catch that at fairly quickly, a half acre. About an hour later, we had the Middle Fork fire just a few miles up the road. And that took a lot more resources, a lot more mutual aid. And we were able to grab that. And at the same time, that's when the Marshall fire happened. And so it kind of, think of it as a game of risk in the county is where resources are positioned. So, as neighbors, as neighboring fire districts, we want to help each other out. But it's important to know that, we need to be mindful of what's going on because, a lot of times if we send everything over here, it's what's over here that's going to bite us. So, at the county level, again, I have a few resources, but even for the Brent County incident right now, I'm not going to empty everybody out because I want to make sure that we still have people to, tackle something if something goes on here. And as fire managers, we're really looking at the different levels of fire danger. What's going on in the southeast Colorado right now is, they're a lot different conditions than what we have right now. So maybe I can, release a few more resources to go help, a neighboring county out. And then vice versa, if we're under high fire danger, then the state's looking at that at the regional levels. Okay, we need to bring resources from maybe the western slope over for a week and have them just be in our back pocket. So.
Yeah, I also just want to make, just add on one thing, around what we've learned from the FLA. I think that's going to come into play as the Boulder Community Wildfire Protection Plan update process kicks off, which there's, an official kickoff meeting with all the agencies. So we're excited to see that move forward. And I think the information that we've learned through this research will help inform assessment of risk and strategies in addressing that risk. And that's to all land within the county. That's one avenue where the research will help inform that action.
Hey, I read the fire and fuel section in the FLA and I had heard a presentation on it a while back. And I recall a lot of talk about wooden fences. I didn't hear that in this from any of you guys today. But I do hear about ditches and I hear about mowing. Well, I'd love to get your guys' take on wood fences and how those play into the threat.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Thanks, Chief.
Good question, Paul. Thanks. And that is one of the lessons that we've learned that, one of the ways that the fire spread, there are a number of ways the fire spread that day. It wasn't just the fences, it was the embers that were getting into the houses and also breaking the windows. I mean, you got a hotel in Superior that went down to the ground and it had sprinklers and all kinds of stuff and fairly new building. But to get back to your point is yes, fences did carry the fire to the houses. And so I have a little pamphlet here that we have some in the back room too. But it just gives you some of the things that you can do in the urban area to help protect your homes. One of the items is the 5 feet from the home. You should not have any combustible material as well as you can. The other flip side of it is it costs money sometimes it costs money, let me rephrase that, to get fire resistant. There's no fireproofing except for concrete. So, but most of the time, fire resistant material costs a little bit more than wood. But if you can kind of cut down on the combustible wood near your house, 5 feet from within your house, that will help not spread the fire.
And how does that threat compare to the ditch threat of conveying the fire, or can you not even really relate those two?
I'll let you have that.
For me, that's a kind of a different fuel model. It's harder to kind of apples and oranges for us. But I agree with Chief that 5 foot section is important. But the ditch act more like more of the wildland kind of fuel fire as opposed to a structure or house being propagating fire. So
So it brought it to us.
The fence or the ditch?
The ditch. The ditch like brought the fire to the.
I don't know. I mean, there's that potential, but.
So we look at fuels as a continuity and arrangement when we talk about grasses and trees and shrubs and that. So in the scheme of this is we have grass fuels that maybe ignite a fence. And then that fence has enough energy and it can ignite the house. So breaking the chain or the ladder from the surface fuels into the house is one helpful thing. When we model the fire behavior, we don't model for fences, we model for what is the primary carrier of the fire. That's where all models are wrong. They're inherently wrong because I'm making a lot of assumptions when I do some modeling. But in this case, you know, whether it's the fences, whether it's the ditches, it's kind of the chicken and the egg. The fire was there on the landscape and it spread through the landscape. And if there were heavy accumulations of fuel, it's clearly going to take those and create more energy from those, whether it's a fence, whether it's a ditch, whether it's heavy haze or whichever.
Yeah, so I think this is a tough piece, right? Because we learned a lot about the wind and how this hurricane force winds. This was a really unprecedented event. And I guess I was wondering if you could kind of touch on homes as drivers of fire rather than just recipients. You kind of touched on it and I heard the word conflagration, but I don't know that everybody in the audience would know kind of what that is. And just like if, you know, all of the open space around had been completely mitigated, you know, would we still have seen fire spread?
Yeah. I'll talk about the home conflagration, propagation of fire. At one point, we timed how fast fire was moving from house to house. From start of ignition on one home till start of ignition on the next house, 8 minutes. So it's moving really rapidly, right? And yeah, there's all sorts of contributors to it. Fences were part of it, patio furniture was part of it, stuff stacked against next to your house was part of it. All these, you know, juniper bushes were all part of what would start the next house on fire. So all those things contributed to the spread of fire. So once, you know, a couple homes get going, then it just starts to kind of multiply and spread along through that. Now about the open space, if we goterize, is that a word? We goterize, I'm making that up. Goterize the land, I don't know.
Oh, geez, yeah, so, wow, that was you handed me a loaded bomb, but it wasn't actually made, right? Right, so we have this fire that starts out in the wildland in some grasses. And it quickly exceeds the capability because, you know, Seth and Company and you know, Louisville and Mountain View are all tied up and trying to get to this incident. By the time they get there and they say, oh yeah, we need like 4 more engines, they really need like 10 more engines because they're behind the curve. It's just, and it happens to everybody when we get these kind of events going. You get that much energy. So not only do you have, you know, all the radiant energy and, you know, the grass to grass spread in the fire, but you gotta generate some convective energy. So then I start to preheat the fuels in front of it. So anything that's out in front of this fire is getting warmed up, dried out, and prepped to burn faster when it reaches its ignition temperature. And the more fuel that burns before it, the warmer all that gets. And then you'll get a spot from something. And now all of a sudden I have an ignition out in front of my current, you know, the current head of the fire. And you can just see that propagation. And when we have that hard driving, you know, mountain wave action with that wind, it's literally like a blast furnace, blowing that fuel, you know, blowing the fire across the landscape. I mentioned that in some of those grasses, you know, there would be enough wind that it actually would blow the fire out. And we've seen that. And then it would take a breath and it would re-energize and it would get going because there still would be enough energy in the landscape to reignite that grass, and it's off to the races again. Then if I throw it into some heavier fuels, that's gonna receive that wind and hold that fire a lot better as it continues to spread. So it's complex, but it's easy, right? I mean, in my mind, I can watch it do this all day long and figure out how to make it, how to make a model, tell me where it's gonna go. But intuitively out there on the ground, you find the flank of the fire and you just keep trying to ride that flank until you can get somewhere.
This should be pretty quick. In the mountains, they usually recommend that homeowners clear 30 feet around their property and around their home. Is this something that you think should be considered for many of the people in our areas, especially who have a lot of, say, open space around their land? The other question is kind of quick. I heard that, well, actually I didn't hear, it has been stated that there was a lot of problems getting water pressure, getting water to many of these fire trucks. Now, someone had mentioned that these trucks do not have tanks in them, and they're unable to like drop a hose into Harper Lake or some of the other lakes around here and fill up with water. Is that true? If it is, should we look at considering getting some, fire trucks that can hold water?
I think we'll take a multifaceted approach for the 30 feet. A lot of us don't have 30 feet to clear. I know I took out some bushes from around my house, though, after the fire. Fire trucks, though, yes. At least I'll speak for Mountain View anyways. All our trucks have tanks and all of our trucks can draft from a lake. And in fact, I think we did that night at Harper Lake. When the water pressure dropped, we started using fire trucks to fill other fire trucks. So not true that we don't have tanks and that we can't suck water up. So at least for Mountain View and Louisville, I believe all of our trucks have tanks and we all have the ability and have been trained to draft out of a static water source.
Do you want to mention the sensor or the tanks that we installed out in the Marshall area?
Yeah, we're working on a cistern project as well in the Marshall area to bring more static water out there, but we have to draft out of those. That's why we can draft out. And then, yeah, the 30 feet clearing, like I said, in the neighborhood is hard. I don't have 30 feet around my house. I don't think so. I don't have 30 feet, but a lot of people don't have 30 feet around their area. Now, if you live, on a few acres, I would highly recommend clearing 30 feet around your house. That answer that question?
That's it's a selective thing, right? There's a lot of species of plants and trees and stuff that folks find in the yard that are horrible from a fire-wise perspective. The junipers and those types of things. I consider those to be like gasoline on a stick, highly volatile fuels. So anytime you can eliminate those, we're cheering for you. But there are, other really good trees and things out there. Whether you plant ponderosas or some of those other trees, I think the key thing to remember is to take care of them in the wintertime and make them as healthy as possible. Because it is your place and you need to live there and you need to be happy about with what you're living in. But there are just some other species that are better than others when it comes to planting them in an urban environment and in close proximity with other folks. Because just because your bush catches on fire and your house survives, but it burns the neighbor's house down, that doesn't help the neighbor.
One more comment on the water supply. Our water supply is not designed to have 30 to 40 hydrants being used all at once. If we were going to do that, we'd have to have huge mains, and that would cost the city a lot of money. And it ultimately cost you guys a lot of money. So that day, we were supplying Superior because some problems over in that area. So we were losing water very quickly. So Louisville was supplying water for both communities. And so that's another reason. But like Sterling said, we didn't quite get to draft out of Harper, but that was one of the things that was the next step on when we were told that we only had a foot left in the tanks in Louisville. So we do have plans, so we're looking at ways to get water supply always. And all of us have hose and tanks on our trucks.
Just one more thought about the landscaping. If you haven't heard yet, Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District is sponsoring a landscape program for those rebuilding their homes, and all of the plantings will be both fire-wise and water-wise. So, you can pull from that list of partnering with CSU and other agencies. And then to the 30 feet point on homes, yes, I mean, every best practice thing is going to say 30 feet is an area that you should be paying attention to, but it's really that immediate 5 feet that is the most critical zone.
I also knew about the templates because I'm on the committee with Lisa, but 2 other points to that. Resource Central here in Boulder is doing webinars every single month about planting and stuff. And in July, they have one on Firewise plants. So I would highly recommend you sign up for it. It's a webinar. Also, they did one recently on native plants, and they talked about junking your junipers and all kinds of other things. And CSU, you can just Google it, has a couple of publications that they just updated with a whole list of Firewise plants and trees. So if you're at the point now where you're landscaping, you can look at that. Otherwise, you can look at it down the road.
And just to add to that, she's referring to the Colorado Extension Office, who has released their Firewise plant list. And, check it out. It's a really large list, and it's really informative as far as, how much sun, how much water, all of that stuff. So it's really interesting. Any other questions?
City of Louisville developing like a GIS plan that will show these little open spaces within the city that if we didn't catch on fire, that, we know where they're at. Hopefully prevent that, those areas from getting on fire. I live in a subdivision, Dutch Creek, and a little field out there, if it did catch on fire, I would take it out a few months. So just those kind of little areas like that, that should be mitigated somehow to prevent that type of thing. And then question for Seth, that Sunshine Canyon fire, 1,000 days, how fast that was taken control of. I really appreciate whoever got on top of that fire. That looked terrible.
To your first point, I think the city's wildfire risk assessment that we're working on one of the outcomes is a map that identifies all city-only and including pocket parks, and will assess risk and then develop mitigation strategies as well. So stay tuned, more to come on that.
Right. Couple of things, someone on your question with home ignition zones. There was a section in the facilitated learning analysis talking about home ignition zones. Had a bunch of homes in red and yellow and green lines, and they all overlap. No doubt when you get a fire in a subdivision, it makes that really complicated. On the response side, Chief's talked about, whereas on one house, we normally have 3 to 7 engines. And on that incident, the 3 to 7 engines just weren't available there. That was what was covering maybe 2 blocks. And so again, that continued to propagate itself, became the challenge. Now I'll turn that into a modeling question. One thing about fire fuels models and fire modeling is that it has to be something that's recreatable. This fire pushed what we thought was possible a good amount. I know I was out of town, and suddenly I started getting a lot of phone calls and trying to get a picture of what was going on. And I couldn't fathom when my folks were saying, hey, we're losing homes at this point. So, we talk about modeling, it helps us identify how far spot fires can go based on the fuels. But that modeling, maybe the models that I'm aware of, cap out winds at 35 miles per hour. Even some of the current modeling and some of the products that are coming out that are helping us with evacuations, whatnot, these programs that are projecting fire behavior, Marshall Fire exceeded what was available in that model. So we talk about the importance of modeling. Historically, we didn't know that was possible. We didn't have that data available. That's changing. I'd say that's one thing that's going to be super tangible. I don't have a timeline. I don't have a timeline, as you know, someone online talked about the analysis of the process of analysis. Yeah, you and me both. You know, I want to make stuff happen now, but it is a complicated topic because there's just so many facets to it. Appreciate the comment on the Sunshine and Sanitas fire. We're really fortunate that we had one of the fire detection cameras looking right at it. And I'll add to the wildfire detection cameras. It goes both ways. So those detection cameras help us identify when there is a fire. We were able to pull up that camera, that image in our dispatch center. And so our agency administrators, the folks who, you know, control my allowance, you know, we're able to see what was going on. And then last thing on modeling, there was a model that was run on the Middle Fork fire, that second fire on December 30th, just outside of Left Hand Canyon. And if no action would have been taken, someone created a model where if no action would have been taken, then that fire would have ran through the creeks, ran through the ditches, and what happened in Marshall Fire would happen in Longmont. So a lot of different interesting, you know, model topics there, and I just wanted to bring some of that stuff up. Hope that helps you answer some of your questions.
Any last questions? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Allison to wrap this up.
I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I want to thank our first responders. I really feel it's important to note that our first responders didn't really get out of life-saving mode. I mean, they weren't able to get into the property protection mode as the fire was just so fast and intense. So I just want to really honor that and thank them for that. Our next program in the series, our number 6, is going to be education and why the protection of our watersheds and water resources are important in this conversation. And so I'd like you to join us at the Superior Community Center. It's on May 10th from 6 to 8. And there's coffee and treats there. So come on over and join us. And thanks again. We really appreciate your participation and showing up and giving us information and things that you're thinking about. And that's really important in this process to help to provide the next sessions in the series. So feel free to email Boulder County, Louisville, or Superior. We have public engagement websites. Both of us, ours is Shape Superior and Louisville's is
Louisville Rebuilds.
And you can go ahead and put any topic that you would like to see in this education program addressed, and we'll work on answering questions and providing another program for you. So thanks again.